we're seeing pricing, quite strong right now, especially, in the strategies that you mentioned. But let's again take it quarter by quarter, see how those trends continue. I think it's really important as an industry to make sure that we are very, humble about, the impact of changes in the broader, economic and geopolitical landscape that can affect these things.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our second episode of the exciting new series, Women of Secondaries, produced by none other than SecondaryLink and hosted by yours truly. For those of you just tuning in, my name is Kristina Kulikova. I'm the VP of LP Advisory at Setter Capital, and I'm absolutely privileged to host Women of Secondaries. If you missed our first episode with Tori Buffery, Principal at Morningside Capital Management, check out SecondaryLink news section to catch up on our fun, yet hopefully informative discussion on the single asset GP-led market. And with that, on this episode, I am very excited to host not only, once again, a fellow Canadian, but also a fellow comrade in the incredible world of secondary market advisory, who brings in over 8 years of industry experience at various high-profile shops, including Lazard, Collar, and currently PJT Partners. Holding a director role at PJT with a focus on LP advisory, I'm very excited and pleased to welcome Kristine Robinson. Hi, Kristine.
Hi, Kristina. Thank you for having me.
No, we're so excited. Thank you for making the time. Now, before we jump into, of course, the main part of our chat, I would love for our audience to get to know you a little bit. So maybe we can start with you sharing a little bit about how you ended up in secondaries, why this market, how maybe you ended up at Lazard, Collar, and also a little bit about how you're expanding coverage and presence in the Canadian marketplace as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And happy to. I think, secondaries, back when I joined the space, was still very new to a lot of folks. I actually had the privilege of, joining when I was in M&A at a prior shop, a pitch with one of the secondaries teams, and ended up falling in love with the industry through that pitch. I always joke that they pitched me on the industry. And a short while later, I ended up joining a secondaries private capital advisory shop, and the rest is history. I've loved every minute of being in this very fast-growing and exciting space, and I've had the privilege of focusing a lot of my time in the last 18 months on the Canadian markets.
That's awesome. And I think some people think, the Canadian market is smaller, of course, than US or Europe. But I think it's just there's so many hard hitters and kind of giants that are driving that market. And so I'm excited to see that growth as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, likewise. And selfishly, I'm a Canadian, so it's always a treat to get back up. I went to Queens. I'm originally from Vancouver. So any chance I get to get north of the border, I'll take. And, I think that the investor and GP community up in Canada is just a group of phenomenal people who are very nimble and, intellectually curious. And I think, it's a real privilege to be able to work with them all and get to continue to know the market.
So maybe just a couple of rapid fire questions so that we can have our audience really get to know you as an individual first and foremost. What is your favorite part of the work right now that you do?
Yeah, I think this is an easy one. It comes down to the people. I always say the financial services business is a people business first, and kind of finance second. And I think, you really have to go into this industry with, that mindset in order to build strong relationships. And, really play the long game. I think there's a lot of excitement around it. I think there's a lot of ingenuity and innovation happening. And I think it all comes down to the people that are coming up with the ideas and finding new ways to find liquidity solutions in our space. So hands down, the people are the best part of my job.
That's awesome. And it keeps you being creative and, entrenched as well. So that's great. Now, there is always the flip side of the coin, right? As much as we love our job, there's always that part that we really just don't want to do. What would you say that is for you?
Having not enough hours in the day, honestly. And I think it sounds like a good problem to have, but it can be really tricky. I think there's a lot of initiatives that I personally and my team want to get forward. And it's just a matter of trying to balance that all within a, 24-hour time block. Maybe it is a good problem to have because it's also incredibly fun. Again, it's a space that you have a lot of white paper or white space rather to just keep running with. Having to fit it all in. I'm sure I'll get better at it. But in the meantime, I'm not slowing down. We'll continue, coming up with new things and new ways to attack the market and find new solutions.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think when you are resource constrained is really when the creativity drives forward the most. And so when you're working through a deal, is there any pet peeves that just drive you nuts, whether it's, back office or client facing or actually executing any part of it that's just a pet peeve?
Oh, pet peeves. I think my big pet peeve is when folks draw out conversations on emails too long that should just be a phone call. I think I don't know what's happened in the world, but everyone's not as easily to just pick up the phone. And I think that that's one thing that I always try to do is when there's 2 or 3 emails back and forth on a topic and there's still confusion, it's let's just all get on a phone
Yeah.
and hash it out, which usually I'd say almost 98% of the time solves the problem. Again, I think it circles back to the fact this is a people business. So we got to communicate and we got to stay in touch. And I think that solves a lot of issues.
Yeah, that's actually a good one because I could see a lot of confusion and unnecessary delays. That's actually a really good answer. And if there was anybody that you could identify, whether it's by a client again that you've worked with, or at maybe not in PageET because that would be really interesting. But if you could wave a magic wand and have a special request, is there any single person that you would love to work with and be on your team to help you drive success?
I mean, like an advisory board of all of my favorite mentors would be fantastic. To just kind of have with me in my back pocket at all times, which in some ways I do, but obviously, not in my day-to-day work. I think at this point we're pretty set with the team that we have and the support that we have, and I don't quite know if there's anyone that I would have. Maybe someone that's a expert negotiator. I don't necessarily know the name, but maybe someone from like the political spectrum that could kind of weave in, their own nuances and kind of layer in that kind of people management, negotiating skill set. That could be interesting to get their perspective, maybe like a political consultant or someone. But otherwise, no one comes to top of mind.
Interesting. You gave me an idea for my new podcast. And so maybe this is a little bit of a special treat for our audience. And one thing that not many people know about you, I think, is that you've mastered what many people can't master outside of kind of the business world, which is making creme brulee. And
Yes.
cooking and experimenting. And so if you weren't in finance, what would you do?
Well, aside from making creme brulee, which I absolutely adore, and I think the best part of that is finishing it doing the nice spoon crack, on the crystallized sugar. See, crystallizing in every side of my life, right? Carrie in the kitchen. But I think archaeology is something that I've always really loved. I think it's really a compelling space where you're able to, unearth the stories of societies in the past, and I think the storytelling element there is really powerful and something that maybe I watched Indiana Jones too many times as a kid, but ultimately I think it'd be a very fascinating profession to go into and very rewarding. I think there's things that transcend that into what I do now, and that we do have the privilege of telling the stories of these deals, right? And we're bringing that to the market, and it really is all about making sure folks understand the story, understand the narrative of why something is coming to market. So I guess in a way I'm kind of doing that. And maybe with tail end deals, it's kind of like, a little bit dealing with history and historical artifacts in some ways.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of similarities, which you're probably utilizing your skill set in one area and interest in the other to drive your passion. So thank you for playing along with me on the rapid fire question portion.
That's
It's
great.
just always fun. And so now let's get into maybe the main portion of the discussion. And I would love to hear your perspectives on, of course, the continued growth of the secondary market. And in line with that, the growing level of intermediation in the space, which is no doubt here to stay. And in looking at actually the PJT secondary markets insight reports that I think your team just also published, it was very exciting to see that Q1 volume is already like 20% higher than the previous quarter, and it's no doubt that we're likely going to see another record year, and maybe volume gets north of 130. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that, and just what your take is on if that's going to continue, what type of LPs at the front line of sales this year.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really exciting topic. I think we had a great year last year, and I love the sound of 130 this year. So, let's keep moving towards that, if not more. But I think we've seen a lot of movement in the first quarter now that we've kind of had time to calibrate, as you've seen from our market report. Which I think should be helpful for the market just to get a bit of a pulse check as we move into the second quarter and the rest of the year. But we're starting to see an opening of the GP-led market again, and LP markets continue to be strong. Pricing is quite high right now, I'd say across the board, especially in the buyout sectors, for high quality in demand managers. So I think there's a lot of strength in the market, and that we're going to continue to move forward. That said, I don't have a crystal ball, right? I mean, we have a robust pipeline that we can see, and we're hoping that it'll be continued excitement as we move into the half two of the year. But I think we'll take it, one quarter at a time, keep pushing through. There's a lot going on right now, a lot of mandates in market, which I think is great for us as both a firm and as an industry, to continue moving forward, and expanding our space.
Yeah, for sure. And there is a lot of talk about, macro headwinds in places like China, perhaps some regulatory implications in Latin America, Latin American countries and Australia, maybe some structural changes in places like the UK. And as you look through your pipeline or sort of looking forward into 2024, are there any predictions on geographic dispersion of where we will likely see the largest amount of LP sellers?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think if you look at the data, it's historically and continues to be largely dominated by the Western Hemisphere. So North America, I think, will continue to be strong. Europe, I don't see that changing either way, from what it's been performing like in the last few years. And I think that these two regions continue to be the dominant players. But that said, I mean, as we continue to expand as an industry, more jurisdictions, more groups are starting to kind of understand the value add of using secondaries to manage their platforms and think through potential, just maintenance, if you will, using secondaries markets as a way to manage their portfolio construction. I think that it's only a matter of time before it starts becoming larger and larger in more jurisdictions around the world. I mean, I think secondaries is both new and old as an industry. I think we have our counterparts at the M&A and other folks that have been around a little bit longer, and so just give us, I think, a little bit more time, and there'll be more proliferation, and kind of penetration in more than just kind of the North American and European markets, which is great, and again kind of plays into the idea that we're still growing and there's a lot more runway here for the secondaries market.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And I think just from sheer volume of, LP deals still being more than half of the market, I think like 65% of the market, right, that you mentioned was in Q1 from your report. So we are going to see that dispersion continue to grow. And as you work through the processes with the different sellers, whether it be European, whether it be North American, perhaps some Asian sellers as well, are there any procedural differences that you notice, or maybe both procedural as well as perception of a process, when you undergo a sale with LPs?
Yeah, I think that's right. And then, look, I'll caveat this by saying that most of the work that I've done in my career has been focused in North America. So, real time experience with Europe. We have a fantastic Europe team, based out of London, and they handle quite a lot of this. But what I would say is, at the end of the day, you're still striving to provide the best solution for your client, and that solution will need to include ways to navigate things like tax laws and withholdings, or specific buyer universes that make more sense for the assets being contemplated for sale. So, I do think that it makes sense, to have a really discerning eye when you're working with groups in different jurisdictions to make sure that you are crafting and putting together the best solution, that encompasses kind of all stakeholders, all, perceptions of, how GPs interact in certain areas versus others. I think it's our job as advisors to make sure that, that we're being thoughtful about the way that we handle, all the different stakeholders and the way that we engage with them. And making sure, if there are potential tax considerations, we're, making sure that the client or GPs are engaging, their tax folks early. And I mentioned tax because that's just one of the, top of the mind items that come up quite a bit for us when, we're talking about different jurisdictions, including Canada. And so, I think it's important for us to also know our bounds. So we're not tax advisors, right? And we'll continue with this example. It's important to make sure that folks know that, and that we are doing our diligence. We are bringing in the right expertise, and encouraging the stakeholders in the deal to do so themselves, so that we're able to make sure that transaction goes as smooth as possible for the client.
Yeah, and that'll often play into dictating timelines as well, right, for the deal execution when you're first prepping the process to ensure that
Yeah.
if there is a strict take on tax or any other financial regulation that they need to be aware of and comply to, that obviously that's advised on. So absolutely. And you touched on this briefly, which I think is probably one of the most interesting topics in secondaries, right, when speaking whether it's to advisors or LPs or GPs, is the pricing component in the market. I think that you commented on this, that the general trend is that pricing is on a trajectory upwards, and perhaps, hopefully it's going to pre-COVID or pre-2022 levels. And there are some names across infrastructure, credit, buyout, again, as you mentioned, that are getting to that par, sort of close to par mark. Do you think we're far away until pricing comfortably reaches, let's say, premium territory even? Or do you think we will even get there? Or are there, like, what are the dynamics that need to be in place for us to get there?
Yeah, no, another great question. And it's a question I get a lot too, especially from sellers.
I'm sure all of these listening are curious. Well, when are you going to tell me my assets are going to sell at a premium?
Great. And I mean, look, everybody wants a crystal ball. And I do think, we're a globalized market, right? So I think the one thing that I always keep in the back of my mind is that how our economy will function and how that then directly, will impact or indirectly pricing in our market, can be affected by, broader geopolitical events, right? I mean, like we've seen that in the last few years with, some of the major events that have been happening and how that's affected our economies, right? And I think that, that then trickles down into if you will, like event-driven pricing changes. I'll take example of the collapse of SVB, and kind of that dynamic in the venture space. I think there's still recovery that's taking place from that, and that was not expected, right? And so I think from a pricing perspective, yes, right now it's quite high. I think for some pieces we're already there on premiums, and that's been a pleasant outcome for us, and it's nice to be kind of back into that space. I think that there's still space for that to continue to go up. But that said, again, no crystal ball. We're seeing pricing, quite strong right now, especially the strategies that you mentioned. But let's again take it quarter by quarter, see how those trends continue. I think it's really important as an industry to make sure that we are very humble about the impact of changes in the broader economic and geopolitical landscape that can affect these things. And not to mention the big conversation right now around interest rates, right? So I think we're all keeping a very close eye on all of these factors, which again I think is part and parcel to being a good advisor. It's yes, it's looking at what we're getting in the current deals, but it's also looking at what's happening, the U.S. economy, how are we thinking about interest rates, what's happening in the broader global economy, especially when we're getting assets and fund lines in our books, and specific single assets, for example, and the GP-led side, that may be affected specifically, right, depending on where they're headquartered, where their geographies are for their investments. So I think it's a really big and important task for us to make sure that we are aware of kind of the big picture as well as the current picture in terms of pricing.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And as throughout the conversation, as we're having, obviously the role of an intermediary, and not that we're biased, but partially, is becoming more and more prominent in deal execution because of the multiple factors that you have to consider and the overall view of the market that obviously you bring to the table. Yeah. And there's been a lot of consolidation of advisors, right? Like Houlihan and Loki acquired Triago, Mizuho acquired Greenhill, and so it's becoming more and more there's more and more confidence in the market that is an area that's here to stay and that's going to continue to grow. What do you think overall, though, that consolidation means for the industry?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think what we're going through right now is the evolution and life cycle of an expanding space. I think it's very natural for consolidation. We see it happen in other industries quite a lot when they're kind of reaching this part of their arc, if you will. And I think all it says to me is there's more and more groups that are seeing the value of secondaries, and the consolidation is kind of the way that our industry is naturally trying to find efficiencies and scale. And I think all in all, it's going to be better to be more efficient, and it's also helpful in validating what we do for groups that maybe potentially wouldn't have thought that secondaries made sense for them to engage with. Now they're seeing groups that are consolidating or acquiring secondary shops and advisors to bring in house, seeing that there's huge value right in what we do, and there's value of doing it at scale, just because there is so much volume in the market. So I think it's great. And I think let's, continue to see this market grow, continue to have bigger platforms so, that we can do broader deals and larger deals in scale, but also have the people power to be able to service smaller mandates
Yeah.
and just become a full service industry for those that want to seek liquidity.
And I think there was a major industry player that has a strong belief that the industry is going to hit, $1 trillion mark in terms of volume by even by as soon as 2030. And I think I'm very excited by that. And I think the belief is that, yes, we will be on that trajectory. Now, whether we will hit it or not, I think in part depends on how comfortable, people are with the industry and the processes and the pricing and all that we just talked about. But you're right. The natural progression is consolidation, and people are seeing the value specifically in the expertise that an intermediary will bring to the market. And so actually in line with that, you brought up an interesting point where you said, there are platforms that are emerging to help with either understanding the secondary market, but more so also actually brokering on various platforms. And then there's been a few, whether it's for unicorn stakes, right, for VC stakes, or whether it's actually just broader platforms like Palico, like Hive, etc. Do you think there is the possibility, roll forward 5-10 years, that they will overtake the role of a traditional secondary broker?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. And you're also talking to someone who's been a broker for a large part of their career. So take the bias for what you will. But no, look, I think back to the point about this being an expanding industry, there's a lot of volume. And, I really do hope that the predictors out there that are saying, $1 trillion by 2030 is accurate, because that's great for all of us. But if we even get half that, there's enough volume to go around that we'll need more shops out there to provide kind of more bespoke services, especially when it comes to kind of some of these smaller sized interests for folks that just kind of want to use these platforms in order to kind of do a one-off, trade that otherwise they wouldn't have had the connectivity to do. That may not make sense to engage an advisor. So I think my answer to that is that there's enough space in the sandbox for everybody. And I do think it's great that there's more solutions coming out. Again, as more firms adopt this, more alternatives, adjacent solutions to the traditional broker come out, it just validates that there's a need, which means that the market is, a very strong space to operate within. It's a very useful space for groups to use in managing their liquidity needs. And so I just see that as more solutions that people can go to. But ultimately, the broker services that we offer are very, very important, right? I mean, it can list them all off to you. I know that you know them, just as well, being in your seat. But there is so much to take in, and there are so many things to consider. There's so much expertise and folks that have been in the industry for decades that can now speak to solutions that may be a little bit more difficult, or deal with transaction nuances that come up. And can provide that kind of, if you will, tailored white glove solution for clients. And I think there's groups that will always need that. And not to mention, there's a very big difference between kind of bringing a one or two wine situation to a platform versus bringing a full book or, a full single asset solution, where you'll need that, scale of team to also assist you. Because
Right.
I think that's one really important element of the secondaries advisory space is it's a lift to run these processes, and that's our bread and butter. That's what we get up every morning and love to do. And so I think having the traditional broker role in this ecosystem will always be very important, and I think it'll continue to be more important as the market grows and we get more sophisticated, complex as an industry, and start expanding our offerings. We've already seen it with kind of the structured solutions and secondaries and the integration of kind of those two concepts to provide liquidity, right? And I think that's just scratching the surface. There's so much more to come. Again, we've got such intellectually curious folks in the space, and finding unique ways to solve liquidity solutions or solve liquidity problems to find good solutions. I think the brokers, that's where we come in, and that's how we effectively can save the day, if you will, and hopefully get the best outcome.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, to your point, right, about even like when there's email exchange, it's just sometimes easier to put and have that personal connection and understand what's driving the considerations and figure out an actually custom and tailored approach. And there's so many intricacies that can come up through the process. And, one of them, I'm sure you guys face this all the time, but one of them is navigating when you're selling an LP portfolio, restrictive GPs. Because I mean, GPs also have a hand in, and obviously acceptance of a potential transfer. And whether it's a request of a staple or having a list of preferred buyers or whatnot, that issue does come up. And so to your point about a platform, that's probably not something that can be handled, but in a personal situation, that is what you deal with every day. But how do you tackle those types of situations on your end?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a perfect example. Like, these are the nuances, right? Where we come in and are able to help really navigate ideally seamlessly for the client. And I think for us it's really about being respectful that every stakeholder involved needs to be taken care of as if they are the client. It's a lot of work, right? I mean, it's a lot of navigating different personalities and different expectations. But I do really think that if you go into managing GPs and through these processes, if there's a stake, a primary stake that does come up, or a staple rather, I think it's really being mindful that these are people on the other end of the phone, right? And making sure that you're doing early transparent communication, and that you're really, engaging and trying to, ultimately keep these relationships strong, both as an advisor, but both for your client, right? The market is very small and large at the same time. And I think it's crucial to make sure that you're treating every relationship with care. And that may mean going the extra mile a few times for perhaps more restrictive GPs, and trying to find a solution that makes sense for everybody. But that's our job. And I think you brought up a great point in that part of the reason you hire us is you hire us for our relationships, and those relationships run strong and deep, and we also need to make sure that they're taken care of. So I think the theme of kind of what I'm talking about throughout this whole conversation, which has been wonderful, by the way, is people, right? You really do need to care about the people in this industry. And I think there's a lot of really wonderful, really accomplished individuals in our space. And, they all ultimately want to see the secondaries market succeed. And so I think with that mindset and going in and thinking about stakeholders and that level of care, you can really navigate a lot of difficult situations. And of course, there's always hiccups. There's always something. That's what keeps it interesting. But it's our job to make sure that interesting translates into problem solve and
Right.
ultimately the best outcome for the client.
Yeah, no, and as you said, the best outcome for everybody involved as well, because the GP is also mindful of a new partner coming in. I mean, it's only natural for them to be sensitive to that. And I think you hit the nail on
Yeah.
the head where it's relationship, it's people on the other side of the phone, and you just need to understand where everybody's coming from, right? And being able to transparently navigate that. So I love that answer. And so you obviously are very, very passionate about what you do. You've had a lot of experience in transacting on various situations. Was there a pitch or a deal process that you were just most proud of that you'd love for our audience to know and to kind of highlight?
I mean, it's hard to pick one. I think every mandate you learn something new. You engage with new people. I was originally an M&A banker, and so coming into the private capital world was a lot of learning. Right? I mean, it's a different space, and so I think maybe not necessarily a specific deal, but in terms of a deal type, I think I found the LP markets to be incredibly exciting and engaging. I think on the LP side, it's been great to have so many different stakeholders on a deal, right? Ultimately, I think all in all, it's been a real privilege to be able to focus on the LP side of the business, and really embrace both GP led or GP side, the clients and the buyers, and have that kind of trifecta of connectivity. I love it, and I think it's really interesting. So no specific deal, but I think all of them are wonderful. I've loved every deal I've worked on. And again, you learn something every time, and I think that's the goal, right? Is you want to continue developing as a professional. You want to
Yeah,
continue learning, and as long as what you're doing lets you do that, I think you're in a good spot.
that's a very politically correct answer, but I love it. And so if we, as we wrap up, and it's been so nice chatting with you, and really, there's a lot of camaraderie in the industry, and I'm really glad that, we're both on the advisory side, and the market is so big, and it's really big enough for everybody to have, an awesome career and really develop those relationships. And so I'm really happy that you were open to having a discussion with me and highlighting, some of your expertise and some of your take on the market. And I call this part of the show maybe a little bit of a bragging rights corner. And so I'd love to hear if there's any last parting thoughts or highlights that you wanted to share with the market, whether it be about PJT's growth or the Canadian expansion, or personal accomplishments that you feel really, really good about. We'd love to hear it as kind of a parting thought for our audience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, thank you again. This has been great. I love the initiative. Excited to listen to the other fantastic women that you have speaking on this podcast. But look, I think we are very excited about secondaries, the broader market. I'm covering Canada and very excited for the growth that's going to be continuing in this space. We really believe in the Canadian markets. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of ways that the secondaries markets can really help groups that may be less familiar or not as exposed. And I think for us, it's how do we help make sure that folks have the right tools in their hands to then be able to think about sustainability and long-term growth for their businesses. And, I think we do a fantastic job of being good partners. And I think ultimately, it's all about keeping up frequent conversations and, being really there for folks when they have the questions, not necessarily always when they have the deals. And I think that's something that we do and value very highly at PJT. It's something I personally value. And I really think that we're always focused on the long game. We're really here when folks need us. So, I have a great team, and you can call me biased, but I think it's a phenomenal group. We're just going to continue on, building out our focus and coverage in Canada, which I think is, one of the best jurisdictions right now for us to be leveling in and putting more time towards.
That's awesome. Well, I love your enthusiasm. And again, thanks for sharing your insights. And, I think hopefully people walk away with the impression that not only is there an increase of professional intermediation in the space, but also that they'll be in great and capable hands for any of their advisory needs with you. They can call and make sure that you're, approaching it from a people's perspective and getting their take on the situation and really trying your best to make sure all the stakeholders involved are met, right? Their needs are met. And so once again, this has been Kristine Robinson, Director at PJT Park Hill. And Kristine, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Kristina. Appreciate it.
And as always, watch the SecondariLink LinkedIn page for updates on our next special guests, and we hope to see you in a few weeks where we highlight the next incredible women on Women of Secondaries. Thank you, and see you soon.